Hey investor friends, I'm Michelle Markey, and today I'd like to talk about a recent interview that one of two of my most favorite legendary investors, Charlie Munger, did on December 14, 2020 with California Institute of Technology's business economics professor, Jean-Laurent Rosenthal. And I'm excited to share some of his curmudgeonly awesome words of wisdom, so I hope you enjoy this video. And if you enjoy getting some knowledge dropped on you by a 97-year-old as much as I do, I'd love if you could please like and subscribe. Thanks. I absolutely love how Charlie Munger came out in the beginning of the interview with saying that going down the family path of becoming a lawyer wasn't the wisest decision he ever made, because he just did all the right things that you're supposed to as a young person and got educated and figured law school was good enough, like what his forefathers had done, and he graduated from Harvard Law School in 1948, then went to work for a law firm from 1949 to 1962 before starting his own law firm slash getting really into his investing career. And it just goes to show that Charlie Munger spent a good chunk of his life up until age 38 just working for someone else and having the need to take care of an army of children, as he put it. So he just did what he needed to do, but he realized that, he said, with his pitiful small earnings as a young man, he was able to make more money pre-tax than what he earned working at someone's law firm. So it just goes to show us that even though we start out maybe working whatever job or thinking whatever degree we're supposed to get in college will lead to certain careers, at the same time, that doesn't have to be our career for life. And Charlie Munger figured out that being an investor, not being an attorney, was really his calling. You could listen to the whole hour-long interview, but I'm going to summarize in a nutshell the keys to Charlie Munger's success in investing. And they boil down to: he kept underspending when he was younger and investing smartly and boldly, and he would rub his nose in his mistakes and try to avoid errors. And he tried keeping things simple and sticking to the fundamentals. And he liked the engineering concept of margin of safety, where you account for the possibilities that you could be wrong, so you have a margin of error with which to work with and a buffer in case you're not the most correct about your investment decisions. And then he also mentions how a key is not only having a lot of knowledge, but also having the right temperament to do this kind of investing, and the ability to wait and be willing to wait, where we defer gratification until our investments grow someday and then we can reap the rewards. And he said that investing is a weird combination of patience and aggression. And he also touches on what I've also mentioned before in a circle of competence concept, where if it's outside of things that you're able to understand and know, then it might be too hard, and to avoid those things, because he's made that error when he's gone down trying to figure out the cutting edge of technology, and then he was wrong in that respect. So knowing your circle of competence is also key. And then Charlie mentions how it's dangerous when we go beyond the edge of our competency. So he avoids being stupid by staying within his circle of competence, because a lot of people can get in trouble that way by thinking they're smarter than they really are. And he also mentions how a poker player will get to succeed at the game of poker by practicing it. And you try to figure out if you have the temperament for playing poker. And that's a similar concept to take away with as we're approaching investing, if we think we have the temperament to handle a long-term investing approach like Charlie's done. To borrow from another interview Charlie did, he said, if investing is so simple, what else would the academics have to teach for the rest of the semester? And I relate this to a point he made where he said he doesn't think CalTech can make great investors out of most people, maybe emphasis on great, because he said that great investors are like great chess players. They're almost born to be great investors. So I like that point that he made, because it shows that in spite of what a lot of programs have taught people, it's surprising that we don't have more successful investors. And if we really want to be successful, although people like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger went to places like Columbia and Harvard respectively, it's not like they attribute most of their success to that academic type of environment, with the exception of Buffett really learning from his mentor and professor, Ben Graham. But the irony is that they advocate for investing in a way that's not taught in a lot of business schools. Speaking of the topic of booms and busts and interesting or important developments, Charlie Munger mentions how nowadays a lot of people are attracted by the money and have been sucked into finance. And when he was younger, almost nobody was going into the investment field. And I feel like he's sort of prescient in projecting that there's been a lot of frenzies of speculation with what's happened with Gamestop and Reddit and Wall Street hedge funds duking it out. And he also goes on to say that he doesn't play the game to get an advantage out of booms and busts. And he says that the reward system is so foolish for people who are participating in speculation, like a lot of what's going on right now in the markets. And because of things like the Fed printing a lot of money, it's likely to lead to a lot of lowering of returns over the next 10 years. So that and a lot of the market frenzies causing what's probably adding up to a not so great market environment in the future. But in spite of that, Charlie also says that he didn't make his fortune in predicting the future, and no matter what happens in the market, he and Buffett just keep swimming along. As much as Charlie Munger's a loose cannon, I'm also trying to read between the lines when Charlie says things have been interesting, and when he says things like the government has done things like quantitative easing, or also known as money printing, to dampen fluctuations in the markets and make recoveries faster, which he said leads to inflation. And he says things like we're in uncharted waters and we're playing with fire, and he thinks it's going to be interesting what will happen because we've never been here at the kinds of market highs that we've been in and with the extent of world economic achievement to date. And he marvels at how it's been erratic, where even if we compare something like Apple's market cap valuation of $2.3 trillion to the height of what John D. Rockefeller's empire or Standard Oil was at $1 trillion, we've never been here before. And when the interviewer asked Charlie if the NASDAQ is in a bubble, and if so, when will it blow up, Charlie responds that nobody knows when bubbles blow up. And he talks instead about great opportunities to invest in places that might not be the US right now. And I know that Charlie's invested in Li Lu's Himalaya Capital Fund, and that fund primarily invests in China. So I think that's pretty cool that Charlie's recognized that there are opportunities to invest far away and get blazers for $42 from factories in China that make them so cheaply, and he's sort of touting the benefits of globalization in that way. And yet I'm sure a lot of Charlie Munger's $1.9 billion net worth is still in the other two main investments, Berkshire Hathaway and Costco. And I know that he's also chairman of the Daily Journal Corporation, which is primarily invested in banking stocks like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and US Bancorp. So Charlie still has a huge focus in investing in American companies. Charlie shares some nuanced wisdom about technology and how it's both a killer and an opportunity. And he said he didn't make his fortune on the cutting edge of technology, even though he and Buffett gradually joined some of that cutting edge by buying into Apple. But for the most part, he says that he avoids technology and avoids things like venture capital, which invests private equity money into startups. So you can see that he's not super into the idea of innovation. However, when it comes to businesses that have a durable competitive advantage, like the Burlington Northern train, they use technology in a way to enhance their operations, such as making trains double-decker and expanding the height of tunnels so that more can be transferred. So in that way of using technology to benefit a lot of businesses with durable competitive advantages, that's a good way that Charlie looks at how to use technology, even if you're not the best at it. In an optimistic tone, Charlie thinks that vaccines will spread around the world and the worst of the COVID pandemic will be behind us, so much so that it will shrink to insignificance. And in thinking about how the pandemic has affected retail, the interviewer talks about the transformation of retail, and Charlie remarks about how you wouldn't want to compete with Costco because they've adapted their operations to be able to achieve an 86% increase in online sales. So they adapted to the pandemic situation and they were able to still do well in retail because Charlie doesn't think that's going away. And as a director of Costco, I think he knows what he's talking about. So I think it's pretty awesome that something like Costco has been able to still do well even in the pandemic, and it shows just how anti-fragile it is, because in spite of how much everybody's worried about having enough toilet paper and food during the pandemic, it just shows that it doesn't keep people away from getting their basic needs even throughout this kind of bad time. So I'm glad that Charlie's outlook for the future is very optimistic. One of my favorite takeaways that Charlie said was that over the long term, big American companies behave more like biology than anything else. And he talks about how things that were great when he was younger, like department stores, newspapers, US Steel and Standard Oil, have receded enormously or might not even really exist in their original form anymore. And he also talks about how they have their little time on Earth like individuals and species and then get clobbered. So it's an interesting, somewhat macabre lesson to learn there. But he encourages us that in spite of some of that, let's get comfortable in our knowledge and understanding of the main ideas in various disciplines. And he said we can't live a successful life without trying to do difficult things that sometimes go wrong. So not all companies will always thrive forever and ever, but it's up to us to adapt and learn how to figure out how to be better investors so that we can invest successfully and achieve financial freedom. So if you enjoyed this video or learned something, please like and subscribe. And I look forward to talking more about investing and personal finance with you next time. Bye.